1975, my wife and my son Christopher and I decided to sail around the world. And we left on our boat, the Southern Cross, a 41-foot Dickerson, to spend the next 4 years sailing around the world. And this will give you a summary of the trip. In actual fact, for every slide and for every picture, we could spend an hour talking about the individual place. But this will give you an overview of the entire trip. So let's start out with the first slide that shows our departure from the United States. We left in November 1st from Moorhead City, North Carolina, to sail to the Virgin Islands. And you'll see the line coming from the East Coast of the United States down to the Virgin Islands in the picture. And that was about a 10-day trip. It was a rough trip. We had 2 storms, 50 and 55 knots topping out, and for the first 8 days of the trip. And but we got there all right, and we spent quite a bit of time in the Virgin Islands. It's a wonderful place to visit, and we had Christmas there. We always like to settle in someplace for Christmas because our youngster was with us, and so we did that. After Christmas, we came on down through the Caribbean to the Sandglass Islands, which are just outside of Panama, and then through the Panama Canal. And you come into Cologne, which is on the Caribbean side of the canal, and when you come out of Panama City, believe it or not, you're further east than you were when you were in Cologne. It's a crazy thing, but the canal runs from the northwest to the southeast. At any rate, we got through the Panama Canal, which was quite fascinating. It cost us $35, and we had a pilot on board, and we had a grand time. They charged by tonnage, you see, so not much tonnage to a 41-foot catch. When we left Panama, we sailed out to the Galapagos Islands. It took about a week. It's about 600 or 700 miles. There was very little wind, and we got to the Galapagos Islands. We enjoyed seeing the tortoises and other wildlife that was there. When we left the Galapagos, we were faced with a long trip. It's 2,600 miles to the Marquesas Islands, which is part of French Polynesia, and that took 24 days to do. We saw 2 ships en route. We tried to call them on the VHS radio. No reply from anybody. Of course, we weren't on an emergency channel, but we would like to have talked to them. But at any rate, they didn't reply. And this was true of ships all over the world. Eventually, after the 24 days of reasonably good weather, we had the trade winds behind us. We got to Hiva Oa in the Marquesas, and when we came into the anchorage there, we were directed to anchor next to this other boat by the fellow that was on it, and he was very helpful, said there was good holding there, and so on and so forth, and we were glad to be in port. This fellow turned out to be Jacques Brel, the famous French singer. He's like Frank Sinatra is here. So that was a very interesting meeting. And that was one of the most important and fascinating things about this whole trip, was meeting people from all over the world. We stayed about 10 10 days in Hibawa, and then we moved on down to Tahiti. That was an interesting trip because it took us around the islands and past some atolls and so forth. And we got into Tahiti, and then we stayed there for 2 or 3 weeks. After Tahiti, which was a lot of fun, we were on through the Society Islands and on to Rarotonga. Really good weather through here. Rarotonga was a fun thing, fun place. The harbor is a man-made harbor, and we had really good weather through this area. Stayed about a week there, and then moved on to Fiji and Tonga. We were in Tonga for about a week, and then on to Fiji, where we stayed for about a month. Fiji was fascinating. The people were so nice. We were invited to dinner at a friend's house one evening. We're sitting on the floor. The dinner was laid out on the floor, and that's Christopher on the right, and Louise in the middle, me on the end. Contact with the native population was terrific. After Fiji, we sailed south to New Zealand, about 10 days, 1,200 miles. Again, pretty decent weather. Entered New Zealand at the Bay of Islands on November the 1st, and we eventually stayed for 6 months in New Zealand. That was our second Christmas, but 1 year had elapsed. It took a year to get down there. As I said, we stayed for about 6 months, and we did a lot of refitting on the boat, and which was much less expensive there than in the United States. And while we were there, we left our boat for a month and hired a camping vehicle, and we drove down, took the ferry across to South Island and drove down the west side of South Island and back up again the east side and visited all of New Zealand. This was very important to us because we nearly had immigrated to New Zealand back in 1960. It was only personal problems that we didn't do that. At the end of April, we left New Zealand and headed northwest for the area called New Caledonia. This was not great weather. There was the lows, the weather systems out there in the southwestern Pacific are tremendous. It takes days for a weather system to get past you. And it's very different than from here in the United States. And we had wind, and which was good because we kept moving along, but we had big seas through this area. After 10 days, we got up to New Caledonia, and you enter this area going through a big reef land, and a horrendous weather front came through, and it was probably blowing about 40 knots, and we just sailed east under very reduced sail until 2 o'clock in the morning. We had to turn the engine on to turn around, and we got turned around and came back in, and when day broke, we got our bearings. We had been set 12 miles to the left on that trip out there. 12 miles to the north. All this wind came right out of the south. So it was good to be away from the land, and we finally got in to an anchorage. Up from there and went on through some more islands, and then on to the Solomon Islands, where we explored Honiara and saw Red Beach from World War II. There are still vehicles and airplanes in the woods there that you can see left over from World War II. After that, we moved on up to Rabaul in New Guinea, and we had our third Christmas, which was 2 years into our trip. We traveled all around New Guinea, and we actually spent 6 months there, and we eventually came around to the southwestern coast to Port Moresby, which was the capital of New Guinea. New Guinea had recently gotten its independence from Australia, and had to wait till the weather was just perfect. And we came across to the northeastern tip of Australia. And to do this, we go through a series of reefs, and the current in the harbor was running about 4 to 6 knots. From there on to Darwin, which is just right about the middle of Australia, at the top edge, at the top side, but about halfway across Australia. And we stayed there for about 3 or 4 weeks, and had a lot of interesting experiences there. And from there on to Bali, where we left the boat for a few days, and we flew up to Singapore to see that area. And then when we left Bali, we went to Christmas Island, and then on to Healing Cocos, which is an atoll. You go in between the reefs, and there's a nice anchorage in there, and we had a delightful time snorkeling around there. It was terrific. Well, we've come from Healing Cocos down to Mauritius, and around the southern tip of Madagascar, where we nearly ran into a whale. We were just sailing along very slowly one day with not much wind, and I'm reading a book and keeping my eye out, and looked up and saw this great big black thing in the water ahead of us, and it was a whale. He was asleep. And when we switched on the engine and maneuvered around him, and he spun his big tail in the air and sounded, and that was off the southern tip of Madagascar. On into Darwin, where we had Christmas again. That was our 4th Christmas on the trip, and 3 years to get there. While we were there, apartheid was in full swing. Nelson Mandela was in jail, but the country itself was beautiful. But it was interesting to see those significant events occurring, and to see the change. In February, we sailed around Cape Agulhas, which is the southern tip of Africa, to Cape Town. This is a man-made harbor in Cape Town, and the fun thing was that the wind would come down off of Table Mountain, come through the town, hit the harbor, and you had considerable waves breaking over the breakwater from the inside going out, which is kind of unusual. At any rate, we stayed about a month there and got ready and went to make the big trip from South Africa back to the States. We left to go to St. Helena, which was had a fun little time there, and from St. Helena on up to Barbados, which was about 3,200 miles, took 28 days to accomplish. We got up to the doldrums, and I'll be frank, we turned on the engine for 48 hours and moved straight north through the doldrums, and there wasn't a breath of air stirring to Barbados. And we stayed there for a couple of weeks, and then we moved on up through the islands and came into the Virgin Islands, where we finished our circumnavigation, had a celebration, and then came on back to the States, coming back into Morehead City, North Carolina, and up the Inland Waterway, and came back to our home port, Trap Creek in the Chesapeake Bay, and we were going for 3 years, 8 months, 10 days, and sailed about 36,000 miles.
We're very, very lucky. Very, very lucky. I guess it's because it's something that you have to make up your minds to do, and do it no matter what else is going to happen. Otherwise, there are a million excuses not to do it. You can even go right up to the point where you're pulling up the anchor and think of a million reasons not to do it. But I'm so glad we did it.
On a boat like this, you can look around you and you see that you have a whole world, you know, right there. You can go any place, wherever you want to, you know. So you don't really feel cramped. You can go swimming anytime. You know, you have a huge swimming pool.
When you come into an anchorage in front of a village, the first people that you meet are the children. They come out in their canoes, or they swim out to the boat, and Louise always made sure that she had lots of bubble gum, or just plain gum, and lots of balloons. And we'd blow these balloons up for these children, and give them gum and all that sort of thing, and they were happy as can be. Then we would go ashore and we'd meet people, and there would almost always be some people in the village who could speak English. A lot of times it wasn't easy. It was darn hard work. All the way from Darwin, Australia, back in the States, it was just the three of us. 3 hours on and 6 hours off around the clock, sometimes, well, 28 days in one stretch. And that's hard work.
There were some hard parts, really hard parts. For a gal, we had about 5 baths the whole, for almost 4 years we were gone. Because there are no baths anyplace else. There were showers. We had hot and cold, mostly cold showers. No washing machines, no dryers. We did all of our wash in the native streams, and by hand. We'll never again take running water for granted, and safe water for granted, and bathtubs, and all of the American gadgets again for granted. We love them all.